Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm Alicia Burt, Chief of Staff at All Raise. Before we start with the panel discussion, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. So first, you can use the chat function to introduce yourself to others on the call. If you have a question for our panel, please put it in the Q&A box. Our two speakers today are Lan, who is the founder and managing partner at Basis Set Ventures. She built and led the corporate development strategy team at Dropbox and previously managed teams at McKinsey in New York and Shanghai, advising Fortune 500 companies on issues including big data, AI, and growth strategy. Early in her career, Lan designed and developed brain training games as a founder and studied human brain functions for her PhD. She also received her master's in statistics, both from University of Michigan. And Jodi is a managing partner at Aligned Partners. She has been investing in early stage technology ventures for nearly 20 years and is a noted wireless technology expert. Prior to co-founding Aligned Partners in 2011, Jodi led the wireless sector for Voyager Capital and was co-founder and managing director of SCG, a pledge fund headquartered in San Francisco focusing on capital efficient investments. Jodi graduated from Pomona College with a degree in STS/physics, and she holds an MBA in finance and marketing from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. Thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for reminding us.
Great to be here.
Thank you. So let's get started. I know we'd love to hear, Lan, if we can start with you. What is the general sentiment in the VC ecosystem right now?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, most VCs are spending a lot of time making sure their portfolio companies are okay. So the VCs I've talked to recently spent anywhere between like 80 to 90% time trying to help their portfolio company with fundraising, planning, cash reserve, cost cutting, etc. So that's the number one priority. Number two, given what's going on, trying to plan out the investment pace for the next year or so. This is actually a great time for VCs to continue deploying capital. Down market, usually means good terms for VC, kind of VC market versus founder market. So planning out the VCs on cash and going back to LP, asking whether there's anything they need to be concerned about. So I would say that also is a pretty important item on VCs. Outside of VCs I've talked to, that's kind of like two main things on their head, and obviously there are a bunch of other things. I'm sure Jodi is hearing similar things.
I am hearing similar things. This is an interesting moment because we've had a rising market, a bull market for so long, and the venture industry has seen so much expansion in that time. So a weird side effect of that is that many people investing in the market right now have never seen this kind of environment. So there's a wide variety of, I would say, psychological reactions to, ranging from fear to mastery around what's going on right now. What Lan was saying about focusing on portfolio, 100%. People are going to put on their oxygen mask first. Different groups are going to have different amounts of pressure from their LPs, depending on what kind of investment firm they are, what kind of relationship they have with their LPs, and what kind of LPs they have. And as founders, you may want to double click on that and explore that as you start to understand the sentiment of the investors around you. Because, for example, a fund that has primarily high net worth individuals who are not institutional investors in VC is going to have a different set of pressures on them right now than a group that is in fund 6 or 8 and has primarily institutional investors. And we can double click on that, Alicia, however much the audience wants to hear. But in understanding the sentiment of your investors, which I guess is one form of customer, one form of stakeholder for your startup, their customers are important to understand as well.
So, do you have advice for companies that are seeking new rounds right now?
Yeah. One caveat I want to throw in with the supporting existing founders, and as Jodi mentioned, putting oxygen masks is also like highly dependent on the type of funds, how early the funds are, how many portfolio companies that you have. Funds have been around for a very long time. Most likely they have a number of portfolio companies they need to support, which means they will have to reserve a lot of capital to make sure they live. Versus some of the new investors, if they don't have that many investments, it means the pressure there is relatively low. We are a new fund. We only have about 19 core portfolio companies, so I'm actually not spending that much time, and they're all doing pretty well. Our entire thesis of the fund is future work and automation. The pressure for us to kind of for portfolio company support is a little bit less than, say, if you have like 100 portfolio companies, right? So that's different type of pressure. So that understanding, I think the point of understanding your investor sentiment is just a really good point, and to understanding the construction of your investors' existing portfolio company and see where their heads and how, third things, understand how they're still working. Some VCs, most VCs say we're in the business, we're in the market, we're still making investments, but some will not make an investment without meeting a founder in person. Some will, some won't. Understand that. Understand, are some funds having a hard time having full partner meetings? Can they actually get them together to approve a deal? Versus some funds' decision-making process is a lot easier. So there are a lot of nuance to understand for a company to decide whether to go out to fundraise and who to go out to fundraise. I would say, generally speaking, go back to if you need cash, go back to your existing investors. They know you the best. They've met you before many times. If the company is doing well, this is a time you need a bridge. This is a time you need a little additional capital. They are most likely the one to bridge you. And then the second tier of investors to go to are people who have met you before, but haven't really made an investment. Because they've met you, it's probably more likely for them to be more comfortable giving you cash. And then going down the list, pitching new investors and people have known you, wanted to invest in you, but haven't met you. Obviously, it will be a little bit difficult. But if they're okay making investment without meeting in person, great, go talk to them. For investors who just won't do that, then probably wait until this is over to pitch them. That would be kind of the order of priority that I'll prioritize if I were a founder.
Jodi,
and you have it exactly right on so many of those points. It's funny in prior downturns, and this is, I guess, my third major one, which I cannot overemphasize the extent to which that makes me feel like an old fart. But despite that, back in the day, and the day would be like 2009, and especially 2001, founders, like investors, founders learned to ask a couple of really key questions that I think founders are going to learn to ask right now. And I have to admit, I haven't heard founders ask these questions in a long time because they haven't been relevant. And those questions have to do with, where in your fund are you? When did you raise your last fund? How much of it has been deployed? So when people say, people meaning the VCs, say, yes, we're making investments, everybody's going to say that. Everybody's going to say that. No one is ever going to admit that they're out of the market unless they really have announced that they're not raising another fund and they're out of the market. So the onus is really on you to ask the key questions that tease out whether people really are investing. So again, those are, how large was your last fund? How much of it has been deployed? When did you raise it? When are you planning to raise your next fund? If you know the answers to those questions, you'll know whether people are really in the market. And investors should not be annoyed to hear those questions. If they are, that is rich information about them and not about your questions. Those are solid, valid, important questions for you as a founder to know. So put that on your due diligence list. Lan is exactly right about going back to current investors with respect to trying to shore up your capital. The key challenge right now to founders in fundraising is multifold, and it has to do with perception of risk. A big problem right now is that there just aren't any asset prices. Like, nobody knows what to price a term sheet at. You could price it at one number and it might be wrong 6 months from now. And it's just as bad for the founder to have that price be too high as it is to have it be too low. You really, really don't want the price to be too high right now. If the price is too high right now, you're heading towards a down round or an impossible round in the future. So no VC really wants to be in that position of writing a term sheet at the wrong price. So I think you're going to see people sit on their hands no matter what they say for a couple months until pricing gets more certain. I mean, just look at the public market. You can see it's just all over the place. That should give you some indication that nothing has really settled. So right now, if you have the luxury of not needing capital for at least a few months, the thing to do is to stress test your plan, to hibernate, to spend time with your customers or your prospects, and really understand what their sentiment is. And at the same time, build the relationships with with the investors, knowing that it's going to take longer, than it did before. There's no getting around that, no matter what people say.
Thank you. What trends are you seeing in enterprise right now? Are there industries that are growing and shrinking? Is there anything that, Jodi, you can share there?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure that there's anything that's not super obvious already to everyone. We're all on Zoom. I was using Zoom before. Certainly my mom wasn't using Zoom before. That's not an enterprise trend, but there's an increased need for security. That's been a trend for a long time, but it's shifted a little bit towards identification, towards ease of use. Obviously, telemedicine has become really huge. There's a lot that we're going to learn about what our needs are over the next month or two. I think there's an increased awareness of that we need to create more personal points of contact, even within an enterprise, from one teammate to another. I think that's a trend that will continue. I know Lan does a lot with AI and machine learning. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, a couple of things I think actually is super interesting. First one is our supply chain and global trade is completely broken.
That's true.
That's why we're not getting any or enough for any personal protective PPE, which is a huge problem right now. I can go into this. I can spend 5 hours about this, but it's just super interesting.
I hear you.
Problem that, how broken this is, which will drive some very significant, obvious change for the future. Either we'll have to bring manufacturing domestic and start producing necessary products inside of the United States, or we're gonna have to relax the certification, namely NIOSH or FDA approval, so that we can import these necessary products. Either way, there's actually going to be a lot of opportunities for startup to tackle. I think that's a one trend that's just super obvious. I spent a lot of time digging into this, which I personally found pretty fascinating. The second trend, we invest in automation, we invest in AI, which is a little bit self-serving because we've been doing this for years. We're now seeing cost cutting. You want a cheaper solution. You want actually less human working on. You want less human in the loop because it's cheaper and it's safer. We have robotics companies taking off because of that, and because people can actually go to work. As Jodi mentioned, security is becoming such a huge concern. One of our company, it's a security inspection company, right? They go out and inspect real estate safety, and because people can't go out and do that anymore, more companies started to adopt robotic solution. So that's a huge trend. That's been already happening. This only made that happen sooner and faster. I think after coronavirus, this was still going to be a pretty major trend going forward. I think the third trend I'm seeing is some of the antiquated industries are finally starting to get traction, like start to automate. You're talking about farms, manufacturing, logistics, construction, real estate. These are the industries that's being traditionally harder to disrupt, just given the incumbents and legacy systems. Now, they have no choice. It is being disrupted, and some of the players are being completely wiped out. So new players will come in and start to build new products. I think the last thing I want to talk about would be, the deskless workforce historically has not had much attention. Deskless workforce is the majority of our workforce, but people mainly have paid attention to office workers like professionals, engineers, and designers, etc. But these restaurant workers were like healthcare providers, they've had no attention in the past. Now we have no choice but giving them tools, giving them attention, giving them the resources that they need to do their job. I think that's a positive trend that people start to help them a little more, both in terms of tech and non-tech, and give them solutions or products. At least then people are starting to think about this. And I just thought of a final one, which is kind of the development of drugs, healthcare. I think that we will not be back to normal. This is a little bit of a pessimistic view, but I believe that we won't be back to normal until we have a vaccine in hand, which will take another 18 months at least, and maybe another 6 months to actually get people vaccinated, which means it's like another 2 years, right? So it's critical for the speed of development, super critical for these, hopefully any country will be fast enough to do this sooner, but that's, what I'm seeing is what's happening right now.
And I'd like to dive in just a little bit on some of the back end of what Lan is talking about with some of these things. I mean, we're seeing highly divergent adoption rates within our enterprise portfolio companies. All our portfolio companies are enterprise. Some are moving much faster as a result of the current market, and some are moving much slower. Founders, your companies do what they do. So whatever the trends are out there, you're probably not going to change your complete solution set, other than listening to your customer. Maybe a secondary value proposition comes to the front. But I'd like to just dive in a little bit on the trend in background processes for selling to your customers. Those are taking longer, even for things that are that have a higher value proposition in the current market. So for example, I've got a company that does IoT networks for critical infrastructure. Their requests for proposal have gone through the roof right now, because of course you want to have non-human intervention in a lot of different kinds of networks. But the government processes behind that have slowed down. In the meantime, we have another company that does smart contracts for trade contracts. Really high value proposition in today's market, but the banks are really slow right now. It's all about perception of risk. So there's good news embedded in the slowness. I know it doesn't sound like it, but as a very young company, I think most of the founders on this call are seed and Series A. What used to be growth at all costs as a general industry trend maybe has pulled back a little bit, and that's good for you, because pushing on the gas pedal to accelerate growth before you have a full understanding of your customer and how your solution fits to them, as well as your sales process, is a great way to burn money without actually creating real sustainable growth. Now you have the luxury of time to actually discover what your customers need, to actually slow your burn without fearing that the market is going to get way ahead of you. It's not.
Thank you so much, Jodi. Both of you, that's great advice. Is there anything that you can expand upon in terms of ways to extend runway and more some of the tactical suggestions for the founders on the call?
I mean, I can tell you very specifically what we're doing with our portfolio companies. If it's good enough for my family, it's good enough for you, I suppose. The first thing we did, and we started doing this in February, to be honest. I've got family in Europe, so it kind of saw this, just like for people who are doing direct work in Asia, I think they saw this coming a little earlier. We asked all of our portfolio companies to do a stress test with the following parameters: 0 new sales until at least Q4 of this year, churn of the higher of either 2x the highest you've ever seen, or 30%. So assume just outright loss of that revenue with no new sales coming in, and DSOs, time to collect money, of 2x your average in the past. So that's the stress test. How long does your money last? I asked my companies to see what they needed to do to make it last 18 months. You should know to a great level of detail how long your money lasts under that scenario. For some of our companies, we also asked them to create a hibernation plan. The hibernation plan is, the mantra here is must be present to win. Again, growth at all costs is not really the answer right now. Right now, the answer is to play not to lose. And I know this is anathema for a lot of founders, and maybe you don't want to play that game. Maybe this is just not the moment to be in your company. You get to decide that. But for companies where that they can't pass that stress test, you really need a hibernation plan. It does not mean that your company goes away. It just means that you watch and wait, and you figure out your customers, and you figure out where your products are going to go, and you wait for more data. But you lower the burn to the lowest it possibly can go, and you live to fight another day. A lot of your competitors aren't going to live to fight another day. So just by being present, you have a decent chance of winning. Not what I know none of this is the advice that anyone wants to hear. But this is what this is literally what I've told all of my portfolio companies. So I'm not giving you anything that is different than what I tell my own kids. Yeah,
we're pretty much in agreement with what Jodi said. The way I think about this is like twofold. One, on the cut side, put it simply, cutting fat, cutting muscle, cutting bone. Where are you? What do you need to cut based on what is your scenario, right? There's multiple scenarios. As a founder, you should map out. If you have too much fat, definitely cut fat. Everybody should cut fat. Should you cut muscle? Should you cut bone? Depends on your business. Depends on what is actually your customer churn. For SMB business, it's going to be pretty brutal. Like seeing 25-30% churn is pretty normal. And new customer acquisition will be slow. If you're working with enterprise customer, churn will be a little bit less. Like we're talking about actual enterprise customers who will have multi-year contracts, which is different story. In that case, you may not need to cut to the bone, but at least do you? So it's a question to the founder: what is your scenario? What do you see happening? If you see this number, how much you're cutting? Having that model, having that plan in hand, is really critical for the next year or two. Separately, we asked every company to plan for at least maybe 18 months of runway to if you need hibernate, cut it to the bone, and hibernate, and maybe take some time off and come back and come back out life. Surviving is more important than growing, for sure, in this market. I think the silver lining to this is that we're talking about tech companies here who are struggling. Imagine your SMB competitors, where your brick and mortar competitors, they will struggle even more. So for companies actually have the cash, can grow can actually survive for another 2 years or 2 year plus, it is actually a great opportunity to gain market share at expense of your competitors who may or may not make this, right? Both in terms of brick and mortar and also tech competitors. So that's one silver lining. And two, in this market, some assets are cheap. Are there companies you can acquire, talents, domain names, whatever it is, other things you normally would otherwise not get, but will be able to get in this market? Think about that. if you pass the test and if you actually have cash to leverage, this is a great time to do these things.
Yeah, we can hire people again. It was impossible to hire people, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to hire great talents now.
Now it's a lot easier.
If you want to hire, the A+ talents, they'll probably respond to you.
This is the time. Hey, Lan, a question for you. How do you help your companies know whether they're cutting muscle or bone? I've never had any founder tell me that they've done anything but cut all the way to the bone on their first pass. And I got to tell you, on past downturns, we do one cut that they say is to the bone, and then we do another cut that they say is to the bone, and we do another. How do you help the companies figure out where's the muscle and where's the bone?
I think it depends on the company, depends on the business model. We'll have some company actually growing faster in this environment because given they do like automation, their products like cheaper than the other companies. So it is possible that they would need they'll need the people to grow, right? There are some companies their burn is associated with growth. If we want them to raise another round in a year and a half, they have to grow. They have to maybe 2x or 3x. If we see the growth still happen, then they might not need to cut all the way to the back. So I think it really depends on the specific company situation. And what I've seen is if a company sell to actual enterprise customers, multi-year contracts, those are worth a little bit less, which means their growth will still happen, maybe 2x, not like 7x or maybe like 2x, right? So that might still happen. So the cut can be a little bit less aggressive versus if we're already seeing like, 30% churn, growth slowing down, way down, the leads are down. So then they cut to the bone. Another set of companies like doing logistics, supply chain, kind of trade, finance type of kind of product moving. So they're actually from selling one type of products to selling other type of products that are more in need, right? So those type of companies, they've kind of transitioned. Oops. I'm sorry about that. A call just came in. So they're transitioned to a market where there's a lot more demand and they will be able to kind of grow that way. And this is also the time where acquisition costs will be much lower. So for companies can afford to actually expand to new market, this is actually the best time to do that because the cost of doing that is very, very low. So we're playing out different scenarios, and in a few cases we're taking a little bit risky stand and to see company can actually gain way more market share in this space because all the other competitors are dying, versus like cut out to the bone and hibernate together as the other competitors. I think just on the case.
Hey, Alicia, I know we're going to transition to Q&A in just a minute, but before we do that, I want to talk to founders just a little bit about leadership in this moment. A topic that is, soft and we don't talk about it very much. But I've seen founders make mistakes where when making these kinds of decisions about product direction, layoffs, cutbacks, hibernation, what have you, they talk to a mistake that's often made is talking to your team only in terms of the facts, which of course are the basis. The data is the basis of all the decisions, but neglecting to address with your team all the surrounding values, all the surrounding decision factors is almost a bigger mistake than not sharing the facts. Right now, everyone's scared. People are scared for their own health. They're scared for their parents' health. They're worried for the economy. They're worried for their jobs. They're worried about your company. They are, whether or not you know it, they're worried about your company. Giving them straight talk about how you're going to make your decisions will create a much more dedicated staff. It'll create a better sense of team. It'll create better outcomes right now than any time before. It's never been more important to have a set of values that you communicate to your company that dictate why you're making decisions than ever before. And if you need a good example of this, look at how Andrew Cuomo communicates versus how the coronavirus task force communicates. Andrew Cuomo I'm a native New Yorker. I can't believe that Andrew Cuomo right now is like a charismatic person. He's kind of a stick in the mud that nobody ever liked, but he's an amazing communicator because he starts with the why. He starts with, my mother's not dispensable and your mother's not dispensable. Or he starts with, we're all feeling cabin fever. This is how we're addressing it. Or he starts with, we're going to save every life and this is how we're going to do it. If you start with the basis of why you're making your decision, the human basis, and then wrap the facts around it, you're going to create much more loyalty from your team, even from the team you have to let go, than you would otherwise. Acknowledge the vulnerability and the humanity of this moment. You don't have to look tough. Everybody's feeling scared.
That's such a great point. I completely agree. This is like, this is the moment you show true leadership.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay for that leadership to include fear, to include vulnerability. Show that to your team. They actually want to see it. They don't want to see just a hard exterior. That's not their world either.
Yeah, totally.
Alicia, did you want to guide us in some Q&A?
I do. Yeah, actually, that was such a great point. I think anyone going through this right now, we're all hearing different announcements, both from companies, but the government. And so really taking a look at what resonates in bringing people together and reaching people on that level of humanity first, and recognizing that everyone's scared is really valuable. I do want to ask, are there companies that you think are doing a good job of showing that strong leadership outside of Cuomo? Are you seeing, companies or leaders that different founders on the call should look to?
That is such a good question. I have to admit, I've been so heads down.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, yeah.
Oh, Bill Gates definitely is doing a good job. Again, leading with the facts, but also he and Melinda have done a good job of showing the human side of why they do what they do. The core value that they're expressing is that every human life has the same value, right? That every kid is just as loved by their parent, no matter what country they're in. And that's what they lead with. That's the message that they lead with. And then all the decisions surround that of where they put their money and how they communicate. Find your core message. And for some companies and some people, it'll be, we want to keep as many people on our healthcare plan as we can. And so we're going to cut every salary down to the bone so we can keep everybody on healthcare. For others, it's going to be, we are going to maximize, we're going to make sure that we serve our customers like we've never served customers before. Or we are going to prioritize flexibility in our staff at the cost of everything else. All of those are valid ways of doing your decision processes, but you do have to decide what it is.
Thank you. So pivoting to some of the direct questions from attendees, I'd love to ask Lan, if we could start with you. I'm hoping to raise an institutional seed round, but given the current situation, do you recommend to close a convertible note or save ASAP instead?
Close whatever you can, the fastest you can.
I'm gonna respectfully disagree. I don't think that there's good pricing right now. I normally say close around if you can and do a note only if you can't, but right now I would do a note. And what terms people give you on that note will tell you a lot about them, not about you. There are pretty standard terms for notes right now that are safe for investors. If they start giving you crazy terms, that's their fear, not you.
So depends on how much leverage you have, right? If you have a leverage, definitely negotiate, have better terms. I think what we've seen recently is companies do not have any leverage. In that case, like term sheets do go away. Financing, people do back off. I'm hearing investors pulling term sheets more frequently now. So I think having money it's better than not having money. Getting money in the bank is number one priority. If to the extent you can negotiate for better terms, negotiate for better instruments, negotiate for like everything better. So I think that's kind of the order priority I'm thinking about.
I agree with you completely. And when I say the terms of, I'm speaking specifically of bridge notes. Bridge notes have, I mean, other than caps, which don't really matter right now. I wouldn't worry about the cap that somebody gives you, but there's pretty standard terms for a bridge note that should adequately protect an investor against changes in the market. If they're giving you crazy terms, if they're giving you, you know, a 50% discount, if they're giving you a 3x change of control provision, that says something about them, not about you. With respect to the actual round, it's going to be really hard to close a price round now unless you have a whole lot of leverage. So I'm assuming if you're asking this question that you're not in the super high leverage position. It is a little more risky to wait and see what the markets are going to do. I think the market's going to be pretty adverse. But I think they're going to be actually more adverse a year from now to some extent when pricing is known than they are 3 months from now. A note will give you some flexibility if you can't close the round right now at a decent price. Other questions?
Yeah, the next question. So similarly, I have a seed stage company that's building a wearable device to allow chemo patients to keep their hair. We'll be generating revenues in 2021. I just cut a deal to eat it on valuation. The note cap was cut by 1/3 to get the round closed. What advice do you have about how investors will look at companies that took lower valuation in the midst of this craziness? And
don't worry about it.
Okay.
Don't ignore. Do not worry about how people will look.
Take whatever.
They will look at. Yeah, take whatever you can.
Take the money.
They're going to know that you got money in the middle of this. Yeah. That is a great. It is a great signal, not a poor signal. That cap is not a real valuation anyway. Caps are. That's a whole different conversation.
A lower cap is much better than I'm already seeing situations where like pay to play. I don't know if you guys even know what that is. That happening, having down rounds and previous investors getting completely wiped out, massively predatory terms. It's already happening. So if you
it's going to get worse,
just take it.
A question on Series A. So hoping to understand how we can tell a growth story to A investors if we are prioritizing profits more than growth for the next 12 to 18 months prior to an A round.
That is 2 months ago thinking, not today thinking. 2 months ago, it was growth at all costs. Today thinking is, look, this company can survive. Do not worry about it. Don't worry about that story. Tell the story as it really is, and you'll be fine.
Thank you. Next question is, I just closed my lead investor for $500K. I would like, congrats. I would like to learn what steps I should take to close the round or whether I should wait a few weeks.
Close it, don't wait. I think
close
this. Just take the money, don't wait, do it as soon as possible. And be safe, survive.
You can always do a later closing as well, but close on the money that you got. Nothing is money until the wire has transferred. Yes. It is not money until you can buy beer with it. Period.
Yes.
Next question is, on the eve of the COVID-19 virus, we were days away from launching our 5 million Series A to deploy our second generation devices. Now with over 35 million in signed LOIs, I'm trying to learn the best and most efficient path to fundraise during the current landscape.
That second piece of information is really interesting, that all those LOIs. It's going to take a little longer to raise than it was before. But with all those signed LOIs, as long as they are confirmable, referenceable, taking calls, you're going to raise the round. It's just going to take time. I would probably focus my energy on building the investor relationships right now and building the proof points with your engaged customer prospects, making sure that they have attestable use cases, that they're going to take your reference calls. I would also focus on investors, A, that you already have relationships with if possible, but B, that have a track record of investing through a downturn so that you know that they will have sufficient reserves for your follow-on needs. Lan mentioned pay-to-plays just a moment ago. A lot of founders aren't going to be familiar with some of these downturn harsh terms: cram downs, pay-to-plays, pull forwards, recaps. These are things that happen to investors and to founders when the company can't raise money at terms that are compatible with prior rounds. So you want to make sure that your investors can support you through a future round, or else you put your company at more risk of these kinds of adverse terms later on. If there's interest from the audience, we can zoom in on that a little bit, but without going too nerdy on you in term sheet terms. The one thing you can do to prevent that is to make sure that your investors have reserves for you for the future. Again, another valid question to ask up front with investors, in addition to the ones we talked about earlier with where are you in your fund, when did you raise it, when are you next fundraising, is how much do you reserve for each investment?
I would also go back to the LOI and stress test of how much of that is still, true ROI, so that you can plan for how much money you actually need to raise and how many units you need to produce. Have a pressure test the plan a little bit more, especially if the ROIs, were collected before this all went down, so you can plan your cash situation and the amount of money you need to raise better. So, raising 2 million, it is easier than raising 5. If you don't need to raise 5 and raise a little bit less, that might be a little bit less pressure for you.
Well, it depends. It depends what size fund you're raising from, as to whether 2 million is easier to raise than 5 to some extent. A lot of your customers have lost budget and don't know it yet. Just keep that in mind. We'll learn a lot over the next 90 days as to whether they really have budgets or not.
Does anyone on the call right now have any questions that they want to add to the Q&A section? I think the questions that we have collected prior to this call touch on a lot of the same points that you made earlier on. So I don't necessarily know that we need to revisit all of them, but
okay.
If we don't get any live questions, I would love to hear from you. Any advice you're giving your founders that you haven't shared with us today, or any last words of pieces of advice. I know we talked a little bit about the silver lining, and that it's a great time to, if you can, there's great talent out there to hire, but is there anything else that you think is, some positives coming out of this?
You want to go ahead, Lan?
Yeah, I think as early stage startups, this is kind of like when the market is like this is where underdogs, kind of surface and become market leaders, right? Industries don't get disrupted from the top; they always get disrupted from the bottom. There's this complete industries or system are getting wiped out. As a startup founder, I think people. It is difficult for everyone, but this is also the chance for you to, if you can survive this is a chance for you to become a market dominant figure, potentially. I've seen the downturn in 2008. I think this is worse than 2008, but a lot of the great companies were started in difficult times like this. And also for founders who have experienced downtime, who grew up in difficult situations, a lot of the underrepresented represented founders, and I grew up very poor. This is basically, I grew up with no resources. A lot of our founders grew up in the same situation. This is basically, we've been preparing for this our entire life. It is, your disadvantage now start to become your advantage. People who have never seen this before people who grew up with ample resources, they're going to have even harder time than you. So those are, I think about it. Don't freak out. Plan for the worst, but also cautiously look for opportunities for expansion. That would be my
So
advice.
true, Lan. I mean, the scrappy, the scrappy underdog is really the one that wins in this. You're so right. Once you've done the looking into the abyss, and you have to do the looking into the abyss, you really do. You have to do the stress test, the planning. What if this bad thing happens? What if that bad thing happens? But once you've done that and you've made your peace with it, then you get to look up. Then you get to say, so now that I know what the parameters of my survivability are, now what can I do within that to just like shred this, to just like completely kill it? And that part, you can't really get there until you've already figured out the parameters. Or once you're there, it's actually kind of fun and interesting. That's when all the scrappiness comes out. The groups that are really in trouble are not the earliest stage companies, as much as it may feel like it to you right now, founders. It's the ones that have $2 million a month burn rates and investors that are terrified right now. They're going to crash. That's going to suck. You are not in that pain. You have more control over your destiny than that. And so the real question is, what is within your control? What can you do? And that could be fun. Actually, a lot more fun to have it in a world where it's not all stupid growth at any cost and burn, baby, burn, but where actual value creation matters. I think that's a more fun world, that second world, for me personally, at least. I hope you find it that way too, founders.
One conversation I was having with one of the founders, I was talking about how unfortunate it is, like, companies have dropped like 90% revenue. I think Aways, just announced they had revenue decline. Many companies are facing this, and Uber, Lyft have like 50% revenue decline. This founder, he responded and started laughing. Fortunately, you'll have no revenue to drop from.
Right. I'm always on plan, says the pre-revenue company. No, zero, right there.
Well, thank you both tremendously. I think your insights are so needed, so valued, so needed right now. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I think with that, since we don't have any more questions, I'll end the call. But again, thank you on behalf of AllRaise and on behalf of all the founders who are on the call and will listen and watch the recording later. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Be healthy.
Thanks, Lan and Jodi.
Bye.